Hey, Daniel, super excited to have you on the show. It's really interesting to have you because you are someone who's tackling uh, which is tech-enabled services in the cleaning space, which is a tough business, but also doing this with heart of gold. And so I'm excited to have you on the show.
Thank you, Jeremy. Excited to be on the Brave podcast. First time here.
So, Daniel, for those who don't know you yet, how would you introduce yourself professionally?
I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a founder of Nimbus. So I'm CEO and founder. I started 2017. So after a stint helping building two startups from scratch, ended up in the B2B cleaning space where we do facilities management for offices, gyms, and etc. So it's been a journey, and I think these journeys are correlated from my previous experiences. So happy to share it with fellow entrepreneurs about this journey that I took.
Yeah, and so how did you first get the bug to, join technology and entrepreneurship? Because, you were a naval diver, you're a philosopher. So how do you even get there? Because you were at London School of Economics, you were at Oxford, but nothing there really screams, technology.
Yeah, so I think I would say it's a bit accidental as an entrepreneur. So I think my journey started when I basically followed the normal track where I was going to be a consultant in the UK because I studied in the UK as you mentioned, and by some stroke of luck I decided, or unfortunate unfortunate luck is that I decided to take a year off before I started my role, which was very common back then. Before you start a consulting gig, you can say like I'll take a gap year or whatever. So the idea was to kind of explore this entrepreneurial side of myself. But of course, that year, 2014 or 15, coincided with Brexit. So it was a wonderful coincidence that that happened. And so after that gap year, when I went to China and Hong Kong, uh, I was told that it was basically regulations on the quotas. And so you've got to go back to Southeast Asia. So how I became an entrepreneur was and how I got into tech was completely accidental in the sense that I didn't see myself going to tech, but when some sort of a stable role like consulting didn't turn out to be so stable after all, I came back to Singapore, which is my home country, and then that's when I started to look at what are people doing that were more cool, and I stumbled into the tech scene in Singapore, and that's how I started building tech startups for other people, starting with a equity crowdfunding platform called Funded Here, which was really my first kind of job after consulting.
Amazing. And what was it like joining that first tech company? I mean, what was it like?
To be honest with you, I didn't know what to expect. I was referred by a friend. I've at that time we heard about like crowdfunding platforms in UK. So the pitch was that this is the first like equity crowdfunding platform in Asia. Um, so I was just basically sold that okay, you get to build everything from scratch on the business side of things, and business development sounded cool, so I just jumped into that opportunity to basically build something, right? And I think it was exciting to kind of to get a sense that Asia seems to be lagging behind at that time to a lot of innovations we saw in the West, and then I just wanted to be part of building something. At that time, I don't think I was confident enough to start my own business. My parents were entrepreneurs, so I kind of felt like I should start a business one day, but I didn't feel as a graduate in philosophy, as you mentioned, right, that I was equipped to to do anything else but besides flipping burgers in McDonald's, right? I was not sure what I could do, and so when someone gave you a chance to build tech companies in Southeast Asia, I obviously jumped at that chance. So that was really how I got into it. Yeah.
And what did you learn, from, joining this company?
Yeah.
Do you remember what was it like?
I think when you join a startup in Southeast Asia, you really at least the companies that I join, right? They usually do not have more than 20, 30 people in HQ at least. So these are the two companies that I work for, right? And when you are employee number 5 or employee number 15, a lot of things needs to be done. And so I think it's kind of exciting in the sense that you get to define processes or define how you think things should be done. So there was that sort of exhilaration in that sense. And I think I'm quite a, as a free spirit guy, you really enjoy kind of shaping things as they go along and figuring out hard problems for yourself, right? I think that was really what really honed kind of like business acumen, how to do sales, how to do BD. Basically, you don't get much hand holding in a startup of this size in Singapore or Southeast Asia. You're basically expected to be smart enough to figure it out. So yeah, I figured it out. I to be honest with you, I don't even know whether till today that's stuff that is quite basic to people or not. But you do find that you get more hands-on skills versus your peers who perhaps took the more typical path and worked in MNCs or banks or consulting firms, because you're a lot more hands-on, right? You hustle a lot more. You don't get clients on your plate, right? You've got to find them and then you've got to service them. You've got to figure out how contracts are done, all that sort of thing. Figure that out from my bosses. Basically always told me to figure it out on my own. Yeah.
That's the tough part, right? In early stage companies, is you're always being told to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
So how do you figure it out on your own?
I think the way the bosses usually how Southeast Asian works was that it was very greenfield. That's always what they will tell you, and they'll tell you that it's basically a paid for MBA, which was very alluring to me because I always considered after graduating to take an MBA. So from the perspective of figuring it on your own, I assumed that I was just given a playbook, some sort of Word doc, but then you got to learn that and then kind of build on top of that Google Doc. So I would say that 10% of that document is useful, but then that 90% is really Googling. I had to launch a press. I remember that we didn't have budget to do press releases. We didn't have budget to hire anybody except for interns. So figuring out usually entails you walking into, putting yourself in the shoes of somebody that is an expert. Let's say, I was a business development associate, right? But I put myself in the shoes of what a proper business development person would do, and then I imagine what he would do it, and then I do it. And that's basically how I have always figured that out. So on the equity crowdfunding side, it was very simple. It was two-sided marketplaces. So you had to find startups that needed fundraising and they wanted to give up a stake of their company to in exchange for that. And then, but you need to make sure that they're good companies, and then so you also have to make sure that the investors are excited about it. So on the supply side, I figured out that you had to kind of hit the universities, hit these deep tech laboratories, which this is pre entrepreneur first, by the way. So we went down to the campus levels, and then on the demand side, where you talk about investors, then it's really about helping my boss build up his community of influencers and affluent people, and getting them excited about angel investing, which is very different from normal kinds of investing. So that has a more predefined kind of theory on how that works, right? But on the startup side, I think that was a bit of there was no playbook on how do you find good companies. Just you start hitting universities, you start reviewing pitch decks. Yeah, I was playing the role of a VC for a while, which was really funny. Yeah.
And then you decided to make the jump to the second company, right? And to be an early employee again. And the first time, of course, you do it because you have no idea what being an early employee is. So
Yeah.
you do it out of ignorance. And then the
Yeah.
second time, you know what you're getting into. So why did you decide to be an early employee again of a tech company?
Yeah, so I think the first company, fintech and all, it was what when I joined that company, I realized that it was actually a chairman model. I'm not sure. I think you're familiar with this, where it's actually turns out to be an established company where the boss is already rich, so he so-called founded another company, but he's not really an active founder. So I realized that that was not quite the startup experience that I really wanted to do in its purest form. So some friends of mine from Oxford, this was from the Oxford connection, where they were building a services marketplace this time around. And once again, it's a marketplace, and I thought I knew how that worked, right? They were building a marketplace, and they were launching a B2C services marketplace, and they were expanding from Malaysia to Singapore. And then they wanted someone that they knew, and they wanted to build a kind of to launch Singapore as a general manager, right? So I was suddenly given a very big responsibility. Then I was sold the equity dream, right? For what early employees were promised in proper startups, right? So actually, I would say the reasons why I joined the second company was really because I really still wanted to dive deeper into how startups work as a kind of thing. And this time around, this second company was venture backed, and it was exciting to just learn about how that works. And so I jumped at the chance of joining that company, because I think the first version was more of like it's more of like a new business unit as opposed to a real startup where it's like it just got fresh funding, it's expanding. You hear about ESOP for the first time in your life, you're not sure what that is. You meet everybody. It's this time around it's a bigger team, 30 to 40 people. You're excited, like it's in Malaysia. Grab came from Malaysia. You think you hear good things about Malaysian, and that's how I made the leap to launch Singapore for this mobile services marketplace. So they wanted to do a Grab local services, which is basically using your mobile phones to find blue collar workers like cleaners and plumbers and handymans, technicians, etc., on a kind of a reverse yellow page model, which is equivalent to Thumbtack in the US, more than say TaskRabbit, right? It was really like a lead generation model, and that was
Right.
quite unique, interesting. And given that I built marketplace before, they thought that I was relevant for that, so I was very grateful to be hired as a GM there, and that's how I made the leap, and pretty much defined my later path. But we'll talk more about that later. But that was why I made the decision to go to the second company.
Yeah. And one interesting part is that, there you are and you're building, a very different thing, right? Which is one is finance, and other one is a very services marketplace, right? Which is a totally different margin structure.
Yeah,
And, you're just building and pushing, it's also venture backed, right? So what
yeah,
would you say is the big difference in, tempo between the first company and the second
yeah,
company?
yeah. I think the main difference is when something is founder led, and when some is when it's not as an established a senior guy that has this idea, and then he tasks younger folks to build it, versus the founder is your age or like slightly 3 years older than you, and he's raised funds, right? The energy level is different. You feel like it's a more flat environment. You feel that everybody's dreaming, and everybody wants to build this great dream and vision. And this was why I was so compelled to join them. Just for some context, my family, my grandmother was a cleaner, so this idea of kind of improving livelihoods, right, which was kind of like the Grab story when it went out as well, was highly appealing, especially because I was raised by blue collar workers, and so I was very attracted to this idea of how technology can really disrupt and transform uh, this sector, which I have observed firsthand as I was raised by blue collar workers, and I think that the young energy, the the fact that everyone was at the same age, all dreaming on the same vision, technology, business, or operations, made it very exciting. And I think that was really, I think, a real proper startup, right? And the fact that of course they raised money, and that was my first experience as well of what it means to be venture backed, where you are basically on accelerated time, and you have to kind of hit certain milestones to really unlock next rounds of funding, or it's game over, which is a very scary thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and so tell me more about, what you said, equity dream versus game over. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the idea that I think most people nowadays are more familiar with, and back then it was more unconventional in 2015, was this idea that you would take a salary cut as an employee. You would get a substantially or slightly below market average salary to basically get some pay, but also some percentage of the company, right? And typically companies will have 10% or 5% or even 15% pool of shares for their employees. And so that was, we were sold at least the idea, and I don't think this is unique to this company, but every startup nowadays would sell you this idea that you're basically a business owner, right? If you stay long enough, you unlock that equity, you are a business owner, and that when things work out well, tremendously well, because we're going to list the company, we're going to be able to sell it later on at a very handsome valuation, it's going to play out well, right, in your longer term kind of return on investment and time. So that was kind of the game, so called. You were saying that we were, that was quite new to me. I mean, in hindsight, I think more can be educated on this front for employees of startups. I think we have a lot of people that cover startup entrepreneur stories, but not so much about what do you do with your startup employee. What do you consider before you join a startup, right? So at that time, I just relied on the fact that I knew people that belong in that startup, and they seem like reasonable guys, and so I took the plunge. Um,
So here's
yeah,
a
yeah,
what advice would you give to people who, what would you really say, like, you need to know before you join a startup? Because there's so many startups these days, right?
yeah,
So, top three things you need to like make sure you know before you go in.
yeah. So I think the first thing is that I think don't be afraid to ask some very relevant questions. Like, if a company tells you that here's some ESOP for you, it's 1%, it's worth like $1 million, right? I think you need to. I think a lot of times when you are young and you are not sure what you can ask, you actually should be asking founders about their traction, about how do they see this playing out to be $100 million company, and what are their current tractions, right? And I think a lot of the times when I was young, at least I dare not ask. I thought it was very uncomfortable to ask a founder for sensitive numbers, right? Because uh, I don't know, maybe I'm Asian. I feel very, it's a very, you don't ask these questions. But I think, and I'm sure Jeremy, in Silicon Valley as well, a proper tech company would have a very transparent culture. The founders, if they are good founders, would be very transparent with all their employees about their current state of affairs, their runway, their runway. How long do they have left before they run out of money? What's their revenue like? What's their user base like, etc. So I think the first thing to know is really to be prepared to ask questions about the company, and even if you feel it's uncomfortable, you have the right to know certain things. Make an informed decision, right? Because it's an informed. Number two, I would say is really do your due diligence. Don't assume that if they say that they have all these in place, that these are in place. I think same thing as how companies ask for reference checks for candidates. I think it's also fair for uh, prospective employees to ask this uh, these venture funds have backed them, if indeed people that work in the company really rate the CEO well, right? Because at the end of the day, startups are all about investing in people, and if the management is not strong, right, you're going to have problems. So it's good to kind of also know the people you're dealing with beyond the traction, right? The ethics of the people that you're dealing with, and this goes to number three, which is that startups usually at the very early stage, at least from what I know, seed stage, Series A, when they promise you stock options, or we call it magic beans, or whatever you want to call it, a lot of the times it's not ready, right? And I don't think you blame them, right? The legals are not ready sometimes. The agreements are not in place, right? But they may put it in email writing. So it goes back to point two, right? Know the people behind the firm. If the traction works out, know the people behind the firm. You really trust their ethics. And then the third thing is, of course, make sure that the paperwork is there, right? Make sure that the promises are made in some form of black and white. Could be email, could be WhatsApp, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you protect yourself, because as an employee's point of view, you are taking a substantial wage cut to join a startup, right? And I guess why do startups need to people to take a wage cut is because they are not cash rich, right? They would prefer to conserve their cash, and so that's why they are offering equity, right? And equity is expensive, and when I was young, I wish I knew that, right? Equity is expensive, and wary when people are giving out equity, and make sure that it's indeed a very good deal, right? So that is, I think, the owners of the folk joining a startup.
Well, that's a lot of truth there, and I love what you said about magic beans. That's I never heard it described that way, but I think documentation is important for both sides. I think there's good faith employers and there are bad faith employers. I think there are also good faith employees. I think there's also bad faith employees as well. So I think it's both sides.
Yeah,
Um, and so what's interesting is that now you've had two early stage experiences as
yeah,
at two companies, and now you suddenly decide, like, you know what, I've had two crazy experiences at two crazy companies, and now
yeah,
it's time for me to make my own crazy company of my own.
yeah, yeah,
Or what made you decide to become a founder?
yeah. So I think if you go back to the start of the where why I started to join here to pursue entrepreneurial activities, why I startups for others, was because I think deep down, I guess some part of me to build something on my own next time. But I did feel that I was equipped to have the skill set to do it the get go, right? And so why I decided to kind of build my own thing, finally built enough experience under my belt, also having witnessed kind of success and failures of startups, I started to become more confident about certain ideas. And in when I was in the B2C services marketplace, it was brutal, man. So the B2C space taught me a lot, right? It taught me that no venture fund can save you if your business model is not working, right? Not enough money in the world can save you, and it was very competitive, and pretty much like what you see now in Lazada and Shopee. Still today, even at that highest level, you're still burning a lot of money. And truth be told, when I was in that, of course we raised subsequent milestones, etc. I didn't feel quite comfortable with this idea of like we're running out of cash in 6 months, or great, we raised funds, we have 18 more months, right? After a while, you start to feel a bit like the first startup where, okay, I wish I had a rich like backer that would give me that assurance that I'm not always going to have the clock restarted, right? But then at the same time, you kind of want to kind of innovate and have that energy. So I kind of wanted to figure out, is there a middle ground, especially given the fact that at least at my point in time, I felt like the fundraising scene in Southeast Asia was still very difficult to, you can't count on just venture funds, right? If the funds pull out, then there was this huge right sizing kind of event that is unpleasant. So I think those experiences shaped me, and I think because I spent longer time in the services marketplace side, I realized that the B2B side was very unexplored, and it was not an angle that I think the company was going down the road to, because it was a B2C services marketplace, whereas at that same time, office managers from Uber or Stripe, they were coming to me to say, hey Dan, can you just kind of give me a total facility solution, right? Someone that can not just clean my space, but like move my furnitures around, do some event cleanup support, decorate my office. I just want to do one person, right? I don't want to deal with like your app all the time. And that's when I realized that there was something there to the B2B side that was kind of like unexplored. And so when I left uh, the venture craziness of the second company, I started to think deeper about, can there be a more kind of a cash cash preserving model where you don't follow that kind of a price war game. And that's when I dabble into B2B. And it's quite natural, right? I think when you're young, most founders, especially when you're young, you came out of school, you don't know much about the world except for how you consume things. So your natural ideas are B2C ideas, where these are pretty much businesses and business models that are in your face. So it's very natural when we look at B2C. But as I had 2 or 3 years experience in kind of technology and in service sector, you start to see B2B ideas as well. And you start to appreciate why facilities management is a very unsexy but a very exciting space from the point of view of entering and disrupting something very archaic. Yet at the same time, that business model is kind of proven, right? So that was really how I thought about my current company Nimbus, and how we basically after I left and spent about a year in a venture builder company, I looked at starting my own B2B kind of enterprise tech enabled company. Yeah.
As you built this, how do you think you have built your company differently, right, as a result of your previous two experiences? So one that you mentioned was
Yeah.
obviously designing it to be B2B
Yeah.
instead of B2C for
Yeah.
services. The other one was, of course, being very much more mindful about cash flow and your venture capital space
Yeah.
dynamics. How else have you built your company to be more, build upon the foundations of your previous learnings?
Yeah. So the thing I learned about B2C that the a lot of the tech is front facing, right? You have a shiny app, your ad needs to be superb because consumers have your fundraising platforms needs to be really solid. If not, nobody would put money in there. But B2B is a lot more so-called invisible. So for example, the tech that we saw, because you go back to the idea of like when I was talking to a lot of office managers about needing a consolidated experience, you basically realize that they trust you because you have a tight operation. And so how do you get a tight and efficient operation through technology? Well, you got to think about back end instead of front end, right? You got to think about how do you manage efficiently hundreds of workers and then create a system where these workers are basically upselling stuff for you on the ground, because your cleaners are your air stewardess, right, on the plane. They're the ones serving your customer. They're the ones interacting with your customer every day. They are the ones seeing facilities faults on the ground, and they are the ones rectifying. So how do you build stuff that will give accountability to your client space and at the same time create opportunities to upsell? So this value proposition was not as front facing as most people think, like, oh, it's a shiny app. But so you're not solving a UX booking problem. You're solving a very seamless tech-enabled operations so that it works like magic and the customer just feels like the operations you're running is very smooth, and it's something they understand, right? So the key difference, I think, as well for what I learned was that cash is very important, and B2C there was a lot of emphasis on market share and not so much on like just basically revenue recognition and collecting cash on time and even sometimes making profits, right? So for us, we also learned that experience and basically went down a more sensible route where you're basically charging for a subscription for cleaning. You're upselling stuff and you're just charging. You're making sure that you have systems that the way clients want it, but are also kind of collecting things timely and that sort of thing, right? So a lot of the mistakes, I would say, I learned from so-called B2C young companies that burn money, and I kind of went the other direction. And I'm not criticizing kind of companies that do that, because obviously Shopee and Lazada have built tremendous businesses. But I would say that it might not be for everybody. So I realized quickly on, as you're in a venture-backed company, and then runway is 8 months and 6 months, 16 months, that I was not very comfortable with doing that. And I think it's to do with me as a person, right? I don't very well when there's a shot clock and there's I'm forced to make a big decision in 6 months. I maybe as a philosopher, when I have time to read, time to ponder, time to so I felt that a B2B model worked better for me. And with enterprises, you're not dealing with consumers, right? You're dealing with people that pay you on time, but you need to make sure that you collect their credits on time, but they'll pay you and it's regular, it's frequent. You're not dealing with the micro consumer, and you're not worried about that kind of churn in the level that B2C does. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because you've been bootstrapping this and building this in a very structured way. It's also interesting because you're building in a very unsexy business, right? Because it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
tech-enabled services, and so do you ever feel like all these other people are all like busy fundraising with these very sexy business models and sexy fundraising model,
Yeah.
rounds, and
Yeah.
there you are chugging along, cleaning their offices actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What does that feel like? Yeah.
yeah, you get it all the time. I mean, a lot of my friends run startups, right? And a lot of times you're right that some of them are my customers, right? And you just see them on this crazy trajectory, and so the first point to make is that I've been there in those venture backed style companies, right? So I know that you're worried about different things, right? You're worried about runway, you're worried about all these things that I don't like to be worried about. So yeah, from that, it helps that I've experienced that before. The second thing was that on cleaning, right? So having done services marketplace, I think one thing I realized, and I think people should know that but after so much coverage in the news, is that the cleaning industry is a huge industry. It's billions of dollars. And I noticed when I was running a marketplace that all my cleaning vendors were extremely wealthy, right? And to me, it's one of those things that's not very obvious because it's very unsexy, and at the same time it was very inefficient. It's very manually run. It's payroll is done on a pen and paper, like Excel at best. And you see so much opportunities to create efficiencies here with technology, simple technology. So for example, our crew, they pretty much work on a mobile phone. They go around doing their work on a mobile phone. We track everything. We compare. Whereas these sorts of inefficiencies creates this opportunity that I saw in a big market, right? That at the time, of course, they have its challenges, but what I saw was competition. And although competition seemed large, competition was easy. And to Peter Thiel's point, that you try to avoid competition, to avoid red ocean markets where it's bloody and you are basically operating on extremely thin margins. So Nimbus's model, which it's all kinds of services, which provides a state experience, actually allows us to be higher than market in terms of the price that we can charge, as well as I think in terms of the overheads that we use to run our business, substantially leaner, right? And I think, of course, there was this R&D upfront. Basically, we still needed to kind of bootstrap and then get to a point where we can cover our tech overheads. But it was a journey, and the other thing I learned is that because I also know now that what you hear in the media about startups and entrepreneurs is just 5% of the tip of the iceberg, right? We don't know the struggles of these guys, right? And we know that it may look glamorous on the outside, but every company, every entrepreneur probably goes through their difficulties. So it's not always rosy on the outside for them. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree about that. It's not always rosy.
Yeah.
Um, so wrapping things up here, could you tell us about a time that you were brave?
Yeah. So the thing that comes to mind is basically after finish building two startups, I think there was this real inflection point where I was to you from building two startups in consecutive the last 3 years, and I was unsure not to venture into building a company on my own. So I really took some think about it. I actually um, spent time as a ER in a venture building firm, and that was still. I took 6 months to travel my head to really make sure that this was something. We started bootstrapping before we raised a seed round. It entailed putting in your own capital, right? Putting in my own. So so this was also something that I need a lot of courage to do. I think at the end of the day, what really allowed me to kind of make that decision was really just regret minimization. So I think all the pros and cons and really solve the answer to certain decisions in life. I was not sure if Nimbus was going to work out. Thankfully it did, but I think really what propelled me to make the choice was just basically I don't want to regret, spend a life regretting that I could have done this. So I went back into building my own company, and instead of working for a corporate, right, which would have been the obvious choice. So yeah, I'm glad I did that, and thanks for the opportunity to share this story, Jeremy. Yeah.
I think that's a lot of good advice there, and one quick question follow up there is, talk about regret minimization, right? What does that mean to you, regret minimization?
Yeah. So I think instead of like maximizing your expected payoff, right? Meaning you kind of do the probabilities and you say like, I lose this and then I stand to gain this. I think for me, at least the way I am, I realize that I prefer to do things where I don't regret. So I don't choose an option where having failed to taken that path A, I always look back and say I wish I know what path A would have been, right? And I think that's to me that's what regret minimization is. And yeah, it's like red pill, blue pill, right? You take a pill and then you look back and wish you'd taken the red pill or blue pill. I forgot. Matrix 4 is coming out. I should rewatch that. But I think that's the simple idea of regret minimization. Um, yeah, and I've always lived my life that way. Actually, I looking back, so it kind of makes sense in hindsight that you there's a certain pattern of decisions that you tend to take. But yeah, that seems to be a big theme in major decisions that I make. Yeah.
You know, you being a philosopher has been a big part of your life. I'm just kind of curious what philosophy books or authors has been, inspiration, and I'm just kind of curious, how has that evolved? Which ones were more, for you when you're younger versus which ones are more for you now, I guess.
Yeah. So I was a philosopher of economics. Uh, I think Friedman's famous paper, I think every MBA student has read about the purpose of the firm being profit maximization was highly influential kind of writings that I typically enjoy as I grew older. When I was younger, I think Plato's Republic was still awesome, right? It was just pure abstraction about how you should build an ideal society. I recommend Rawls' Theory of Justice. I think I was very influenced by political philosophy, and I think this also shapes, I think, people that tend to do social impact stuff or social enterprise work or dealing with people of low wage workers, right? A lot of this kind of thing influence you a lot. Definitely influenced my way of thinking about the world. And then as you grow older, you kind of balance it with economics, and so Friedman's stuff is amazing to read and to kind of think why he's wrong or right. I think that he's a great thinker in that sense. And yeah, I also admire the work of even philosophers like David Hume, which talks a lot about philosophy of science, and Smith, right? Adam Smith was also a thinker, great philosophical writer as well, and really enjoyed his stuff. Yeah.
What's the place of philosophy in a world of technology where everything's moving faster and faster, right? Should we just junk it all? I mean,
I think the apart from flipping burgers as a skill set that equips you with, I think it equips think quite critically, zooms out, helps you to see, filter out noise and signals, right? I think that's been helpful. And philosophy always encourages contrarian views, and I think this alludes to your point that, let's say, like, we do facilities management, right? Ostensibly, it's a very doing a subject like philosophy with being a bit different. I think that helps. I think that it got me there straight away. Brexit helped as well, but it helps you to be comfortable being different and comfortable with your train of thought because you reasoned it out, sought the most intelligent counter argument to your position, and you feel that you're still right, more sure that you might be correct. It helps me with my journey. So, for example, when you talk about moments of doubt, or when you look at other successful people around you, etc., I think having this good grip of yourself and contrarian thinking helps to know who you are and the journey that. Yeah, I think that there's a role in philosophy. Not sure. Don't think so, but I think it helps you to be comfortable being a bit more different. And I think we all know it takes a lot of bravery to be doing entrepreneurship in Southeast Asia.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. I'd love to wrap things up by summarizing the three big themes that I got from this discussion. The first, of course, is thank you so much for sharing your early journey. Obviously, school in London School of Economics in Oxford, in philosophy to accidentally becoming an early employee company where someone was more of a chairman to someone where it was actually more of a VC back kind of company. And I love the learnings that you had as an early employee that let you really about the different speeds of the company and how you would think about, as a result, the differences between more of a bootstrap or slower speed approach versus more of a VC funded approach. And I love how you later brought that out later about the speed and the differences and how people should be thinking about it beyond the headlines and the nice offices and things like that.
Yeah.
The second, of course, is I love the key takeaways about sexy businesses versus unsexy businesses, which is not just about the context of office and facilities management and the fact that cleaning businesses are actually often very rich businesses, even though they're very inefficient. But also in the context of also talking about what you learned that B2C often requires a bunch of optimizations that are be fully optimized for profitability or for long-term sustainability, but more for customer experience or for fundraising or for highly competitive, cannibalistic markets. Um, and so, I think you shared that in different environments and situations and examples you gave. So I
Yeah.
think lots of different examples you gave, which were really helpful. And lastly, thank you so much for that little tidbit about your favorite philosophy, lots of keywords for people to Google, and how you think that philosophy isn't something that should be junked, but lets you be contrary and divergent point of view for other people and lets you be a founder today. So thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on the show. I really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Jeremy, for having me.